And this closes already part number 1, introduction. But before we go to part number 2, I want to discuss some tiny little details here and to maybe give you an idea where I have my eye when I select images for 3D work. And again, photography in terms of art or just exhibitions is something completely different than photography for 3D. And to know exactly where the difference is of course very helpful when you give order to shoot something, because the photographer will go always in terms of art into the field and you have maybe just information in mind. First of all, where's the problem here with this picture? This image here is of course tone mapped. You can see this here. There's no darkness in the shadows like here. That is maybe here pretty natural. But as I have done this picture, I know it for sure, this is tone mapped. There's a lot of information pulled after it was already merged. And so we have here more an painterly effect, something as our eyes adapt to a scene, we see these areas, but a camera with one exposure would have maybe problems to produce something like this when we have at the same time the sun here and blossoms here and so on. There's no problem with the format, it's 2:1, it's perfect for a 360 by 180 degree, and as you can see with the distortion here on top and on the floor, this is prepared to be projected in a spherical mode. The pole caps are stretched here, and here the horizon is nicely done, pretty much like a normal image. You can't really see any distortion in it. The first problem that I would have with this image here is that we have a very close foreground here. That would allow only for a camera to move around its axis, not move left or right, up and down, back and forth, because the parallax that would normally be created by such a movement is not given with a panorama. So the camera is pretty limited, and you would have maybe some problems to convince someone that any movement would work. The next part is it is pretty much, yeah, I would think useless. So now comes the point why I have chosen that, and I go here pretty close into that edge. Can you see that already? It's not the blossom that's a lilac and green here, it's chromatic aberration, and that is of course very easily to create with a fisheye lens. They have these problems more than others, but this is something pretty much every lens has, more or less. You can suppress this in Camera Raw and render out these colors here. It's of course always a danger when you have a color exactly like this fringing here in your scene that will suffer, so have an eye on that. This can be fixed, but if you don't fix it, it will be always in the picture, even if you move the camera, and then it looks maybe completely off, because that's normally a phenomenon that is more on the border than in the middle. But when you move your camera straight up, in this case, you would see that in the middle, and then it's a dead giveaway that is an image, and we want to create of course the illusion of animation. So chromatic aberration here very clearly not what we want to have. So I click this away. Next one. This is of course not in 360 by 180 degree panorama. This is roughly set 180, roughly. I haven't measured it, but you can see here this house or this building is 90 degrees. So we go far on this side and a little bit to the right, and I would say it's close to be 180. So we could have a half panorama from this. Where is the problem here? If the scene would be very long, we would expect that these clouds are moving. I can make a mask and create maybe something new with light and some stuff in Cinema 4D. We have clouds there. Perfect. That would work. But what we have here in the scene is something completely different. We have not so much traffic here. That would be a dead giveaway if the camera would see this area with the frozen car lights here. Not very nice. But more importantly, any camera movement would destroy the illusion, because we have reflections here on this surface and here. And any camera movement that we would have with an object that is that close would normally require that we first paint out all the reflections and bring them back in later on. That's maybe a little bit impossible to do. So maybe it's easier just to model the whole building newly and go from there. It's also very close to the camera, so we have some distortion in it, and I'm not certain with the unwrapping and the straight undistorting option here if we get really something out that would work in a scene. Maybe blurry, maybe in the background, maybe just for a very short camera shot, that would work. But I see a lot of problems here, and it's a dead giveaway that we have an image here. Maybe sometimes it's even better to really shoot with a camera what you have in the city instead of just relying on an image, when you need exactly this as a mood. Okay, so here I have the clouds with movement, the reflections in it, and it's too close in the foreground. But maybe camera mapping can help here. Let's have a look to the next one. This would here be a perfect panorama as a background plate, not even roundish projected or something like that, just on a plane, and we take maybe a small little square out and we move the camera from left to right or backwards. The big problem here is, of course, it has a lot of color correction already in it, so we would have the need to get all the textures exactly in the same way, which I normally wouldn't suggest, to start out with a color corrected panorama and then adapt the whole scene to it, because maybe you need all the parts in your scene for another one and another one, and then you have to adapt each time to the panorama. That shouldn't be the way. So this here is from the start already useless, because there is so much change in it that I would think it's easier to try to get the original file back with no color correction, with no adjusting the contrast and all of that, and start from there. Inside of cinema, I prefer at least to have always neutral material and not something that looks already nice or so. Again, the separation between photographer and the separation between the stuff that we need. Information versus art, so to say, because we produce art from this information. We don't want to have the art already inside. Just as an explanation. Okay, the biggest problem here is, of course, that we have all these cars and trucks on the highway, and perhaps a train, and maybe something here with the water. That's a dead giveaway that we have maybe nothing useful here. We would have the need to take all these cars out and then take little proxies here in and animate them by hand. I've shown that in the Las Vegas scene in Jets making off. That's some work. It works, of course, but it's a lot of cleanup work that you have to do. And what I would do here, really urgently, to take the sky completely out, because maybe the camera wants to go higher, and I would replace this with Cinema 4D sky objects. Okay, so this image here, even if it has some beauty in it with all these merging browns and so, you might have a different idea about this, but it's useless. It's pretty much not able to go with that into any project. Okay, let's have a look to the next one. So I think you get already the point. It's pretty simple. The sky is certainly not the problem. It's not in 360 as we can see, because then we would see maybe here the extension coming out somewhere here. It's not going around, otherwise the whole building would show up somewhere here or here. It's not even a 180-degree image. What we have here in terms of problems is, first of all, these sunspots go very fast. When we have longer animation, that wouldn't work. What we have next is, of course, water. Water moves always, or it is completely like a mirror. This little ripple here will always move. There's no excuse. It's a dead giveaway. Then any camera move would change here, of course, the reflection. Very bad to have that in a scene. You have to replace it completely with a plane and put some noise on it and whatever works finely for the scene. And of course the water here, here, here and here. This is not frozen ice. This is water that moves, gives ripples and catches light. This needs to be moved and animated. That's quite something to do, of course, and not simple. So the whole picture, perhaps nice, but not useful at all. And I hope you have learned already again something where you say, this is not for my project. When you have a very fast camera move, perhaps it might work, but changes are always possible, and the client wants to have it maybe 5 times longer, and then you have maybe problems. Okay, let's have a look to the next one. Certainly a nice picture, and I like it a lot, but this is more something that I would put in a gallery on a wall and would sell it, but it's not something that I would use at all in 3D, because it has frozen motion in it, it has reflections in it, it has some lens artifacts here around the lights. You can see that here, these little strikes. When I increase here the size, you can see that, and all of that would move here, of course, a little bit in the moment you move the camera, and if that is frozen as well, there is no love in the picture anymore. How would I do this? To have these people here on the left and the right out, to have all these cars out, it's not simple. And the light sources are really hard to get out, even if you have only few cars in it. But the best idea is, of course, to keep the camera on this position, maybe, and shoot 10, 20 pictures, then go a little bit further to shoot again 10 or 20 pictures, and so on, until you have everything covered without the light or the information from the cars. And then you can stitch it. It's maybe a longer process, but then you can vitalize it in 3D again, and you get all these effects that you want. And you can adjust the time, you can adjust the brightness, you can really work with it. In that way, as it is now, it's useless again. Sorry when I complain, it's my own work, so I can do this, of course. I do not step on anyone's toes other than my own. And I wanted to show you, of course, where we can run into problems. The nicest part here on the whole picture is that we can maybe just select the sky very nicely and put something else in it with stars and all of that. Okay, next one. This is maybe a wonderful background when you want to do a theater play or something like that, a stage play. This is not useful at all for anything in 3D. I have created this with a nice and dreamy, cozy Sunday in America. And this is tone mapped to death, nearly. And tone mapped has, of course, many directions, over-saturated colors and all of that. That's not really my taste, but other people like that, of course. For me, it's more painting with light and like painting it. To make a photo like a painting means you go with your adaptation to it, and I have said that already in the first image. So to get the dark areas more and more out of the middle field and have it maybe darker here on the sides to focus on areas where you want to lead the audience eye. But then again, you have people inside, they stand still, especially not the players here on the game field. And you have, of course, trees in it. And trees have always a little bit movement. So I would rather shoot an area where I have no trees and place maybe trees in it that I have filmed against the blue sky, where I can pull a mask and have a little bit of motion in it. Or just artificial trees in 3D, which is always a little bit difficult and a lot of polygons normally. Anyway, tone mapping here is pretty much the knockout term for this, and I wouldn't use it, to be honest. It's nice in the background, but anything tone mapped is end of life for a picture in 3D, because you don't want to change all your textures and the lights and so on. And even if it would be possible, you have always to keep in mind, whatever you do, if something like this goes into the reflection and you tone map your object, you double tone map, and that goes maybe completely wrong then. So something like this, have an eye on that. When it's too soft, too painterly, that's not for you. In this image we have of course people in it, cars, and light streaks or lens flare and all of that. A flag, a little bit wind in it. That giveaway, not nice. Anyway, what we have here is of course a huge color tint, and I have done this as I wanted it to have it, because that's the light how I recognize it in downtown LA. It's very warm. They have these gas vapor land, and that's maybe a yellowish light, and it's nice for an image that you want to give maybe to someone. But for 3D, I don't know, I would always go with a color corrected one, white balanced and really clean, because you have already some white tones in it where you had a different light. And when you go now and color correct it for this, maybe this changes then a lot. What I think is the biggest problem here is, of course, this is distorted to be straight. And the truth is, of course, this building here wouldn't be that straight when you photograph it from one point. It would be maybe here a little bit roundish already. So here we have an example where all the verticals are undistorted to be verticals again. And with a wide angle view like this, and this is over 180 degrees, you would have a little bit more distortion in it. And this is pretty much really hard to fix in 3D. So many parts here in this picture won't work really well for you in 3D. Again, there might be an exception when you have this nicely projected on a 180 degrees half cylinder and your camera moves very fast and you have it all in 3D and HDRI, then maybe the motion blur is perfect and all these problems that I have noticed here maybe vanish in just motion blur. Of course, from the start I would shoot differently if that would be for 3D, especially foreground objects. I would try always to have a huge distance to anything, just to have it possible to move the camera a little bit without giving it away that I have no parallax in it. Okay, this is obvious, and I have done this on purpose because I liked it. It was a test how far Photoshop can deal with fisheye lenses, and this is as much as it can deal with it. I normally use Pitigoi for that, and it works very well, but here that was all Photoshop could give me with that lens. It's a fisheye lens, and normally I shoot 3 shots to get exactly one time my 360 by 180. But I thought it looks very interesting. It looks very weird. And so I left it in that way. And for this tutorial, I think it's perfect because it illustrates lens distortion in a nice way. Half corrected, half not corrected. And of course, the seams here are not really nicely done. You see here, this tree is normally here. Something between would be right. And there's a lot of parts in it where I would immediately think, okay, blown out areas, not useful, lens flare here, not useful, and a tripod in it. Very bad, very bad. So again, this is my work. I can complain about it, and you might have a smile on your face when I talk about this in this way. Don't think that I want to be mean about this. It's more to give you an idea where to have an eye on, and too much distortion from a lens is maybe not really visible in the first place, but in the moment you move a camera around and all these things have a wavy length in it, a wave form in it, it's not nice. So this just for fun and to point out lens distortion shouldn't be in a good panorama. Of course, there's always the distortion from the projection method that you use in it. I think you get already used to it. So where's the problem here? The people? Yes. Here's a little bit of traffic possible? Yes. Skyscrapers with no movement in the lights, that can be fixed with 2 or 3 images of that, where you have then the option to blend between and so on. That would be possible. But what is maybe not that obvious is this metal stuff here. And the moment you move the camera or an object close to it, you would expect that you have the reflection in it. And if that is more or less static, then it looks like all these colors here are painted on a wall. It's then not longer a reflection. And especially the light that reflects here should move if you move the camera a little bit. So this image, again, not useful. And again, I do this here on purpose because I want to show you what is not working at all, to save your time, of course. And then we have here our last one, which we had seen before. And of course, my biggest complaint here is, of course, it was not done very well. It is wavy here. That means the camera was not really vertically. This is for 360 by 180 not really a problem, because in the moment you put it on a sphere, you can tilt or bank the sphere a little bit, and then these wavy horizon line here, and you can see that here, especially on the lamp pole, that can be fixed to a certain degree, but it's not really nice. And that is my complaint here from this image. And of course here I wanted to have everything in the foreground, but normally I would always suggest go maybe to a place where you don't have things too close to it. And if you need something very close, make extra images and have them separated. It's faster. This closes my long rant about my own work, but I shoot, of course, for both worlds, and so I can live with my own critique very nicely. Thanks for listening. See you in part 2 of this series.